It's loading, still loading. Setting up your meeting for YouTube Live. This is very interesting. I'm learning some stuff as we go. Oh, perfect. It's up. That's
Okay.
embarrassing. They got me talking. All right.
I can share
Welcome,
this.
Halash and Shrey.
Thank you.
Thank you.
In today's workshop, we're going to go over ideation, how to come up with good ideas. So I guess I think everyone knows why ideas are important, but just to make the point even more clear, think about, a case where, you would make a simple calculator for a hackathon. When you make something like that, it is technically hard to make, but it doesn't come across as particularly innovative. Something you could do instead of making a simple calculator is you could make a workout app that makes a workout schedule for you. And that's doing the same thing on the technical side. It's using calculations and it's doing calorie counting for you and making a workout and eating routine for you. But one of the ideas is a lot more useful and sounds a lot more innovative and is more innovative than the other one. And that's sort of why coming up with the right idea is important, because you might have the technical skills to build a good product, but the product has to be good enough to impress and create something new. And I think one of the most important things is coming up with a why to any question. So I think asking the question why to do anything is the most important thing. If you look at Apple, I think they're a great example of this. Whenever Apple comes out with a product, they have a very strong why behind every product they come up with. When they come up with a new MacBook Pro, their why is to create the best laptop for professionals. That's the motto that they're going with, and then everything else follows from there. So in that light, it's very important to start with a very strong problem that you're working on. If you're working on solving something that affects people's mental health, and you create a product in that space, that's gonna be very helpful to all of your users. And it shows when a product has impact. A lot of hackathons, criteria they have is impact. And I think in real life too, if you create anything, I think impact is definitely one of the more important things that you're working with. So most definitely starting with a problem is very important. Now putting this abstract advice into more practical terms, starting with the problem seems pretty vague. What you can do here is you can start with a problem that's really broad. You can start with something like, oh, I want to do something in healthcare. And then at every step, you start becoming more specific. So if you start with something in healthcare, then you can be like, oh wait, I think within the field of healthcare, I think Parkinson's disease might be a good one to handle, and you can narrow it down based on availability of resources. So specifically for Parkinson's disease, I think there are a lot of data sets that are available related to that, which will let you make good products. So an example of something I made at a hackathon was I started with thinking about I want to make something in healthcare. And then I looked at data sets about healthcare online. And I came up with this Parkinson's patient handwriting data set. And I trained a classifier on it, and I made an app around that. And I was able to make a tool that diagnoses Parkinson's disease. So start off with a broad problem, and at every step of your ideation process, you have to start making it more and more specific. And you can narrow down your search by looking at what resources are available, which problems are the easiest to handle, which problems haven't been oversolved, So an example, within the field of healthcare, there are a lot of people who make sign language detectors. And if you go on GitHub right now and you search for like sign language detector, you'll find at least like hundreds and hundreds of people who have made that project before. Um, I think something I like to aim for personally when I'm coming up with an idea is originality. And it's not necessarily because, a hackathon judge is going to know if your idea is original or not, but just for the sake of creating something new. When you come in, you do a lot of work. You don't want to reinvent the wheel, and you don't want to do something that hundreds of people have already done before. And I think that's actually it increases the value of your hackathon experience, if you ask me. If you just create something, that you can find the code to anywhere, or something that already exists at a company, um, yeah, that might actually help you in the hackathon. But I think the goal of the hackathons is like bigger than what you create here. It's to take the ideas and products you make here and potentially turn them into something that's real. So my next piece of advice is, if it's a problem that you have, or if you know someone with the problem, then I think you should definitely go for it. And I think over like a problem that you have no idea about, always pick something that you personally have a problem with, or that you know someone who has a problem with. The reason why this advice makes sense is because if it's a problem you personally have, you know exactly what the pain points of the users, you know exactly what they need out of your product, and that will help you design your features really well. So going back to the Parkinson's example, I had a few relatives who had Parkinson's disease, and that was really helpful because I was able to send my product to them, and they were able to test it before I was able to demo it. And actually, I used videos of them testing it in my demo at the hackathon. So that definitely improved my chances at the hackathon. And another thing is, you can't make a good idea if you don't have the problem. I genuinely don't think you can make a good product unless you know someone with the problem, or you have the problem yourself. And I think the reason is because then you get into the field of speculation. If you don't actually have the problem, or if you don't know someone with the problem, you're just speculating what it feels like to be them. And more often than not, your speculations will be incorrect. And a great example of this are like a lot of startups who start off building apps that no one actually needs. And I've done this plenty of times myself, where I worked on something that sounded really cool, but something that I had no idea about. Um, an example of this is, I was trying to make software for visually impaired people when I was back in high school, and the problem was, when I actually, I spent months building this software, but then when I actually ended up, asking someone to test it for me, they said my priorities were completely incorrect, and I was focusing on problems that were already solved, or problems that didn't really affect them as much. So definitely, I think, try to solve problems that you have. An example of this is, last Hack Texas, me and my team, I thought we should work on something along mental health. And most definitely, a lot of college students, and we struggle with mental health at times. And the problem that we decided to target was that we don't really like to journal. And based on that, we were able to make an app that automatically writes journal entries for you, and you just have to fill in the gaps there. The reason why that product worked out was because we actually know the problem that we're dealing with here. We know that we find this problem for ourselves. And if you're someone who will use your own product, I think that's a really good sign that you should end up building it, because you can then make features that you like. And I think if you're representative of your consumer base, then you'll be able to make a product that they'll really enjoy, and they'll find like an attention of detail in that product that someone who's not who doesn't have the problem could never put into that product. And I think that's really important. I think out of all those three, I think this is something that's really important. So I think another great place to start looking for ideas is to start looking for problems that you have yourself, you know. And I think all of us have a lot of problems with the world at any given time. So I think if you look hard enough in your team, you look hard enough within yourself, I think you'll find many, many problems that you feel, are needed to be solved. And I'll pass it on to Shrey to do a small case study.
All right, so I'm just gonna go over, a quick case study of Dubit, which was one of Palash's projects, which won 2 hackathons and $100,000 grant. So I'd say it was a pretty good idea. So I'm gonna basically go over, starting like high level and going, deeper into what problem the project actually solved, and kind of showcase the process of how you can narrow down from something big to something that's a good idea and that's implementable within a shorter time frame. So the high level idea over here, the high level problem over here is that people speak different languages. And when you have people speaking different languages, obviously it's difficult to communicate with anybody and everybody, just because, you don't have any common language, and that creates a barrier between people in terms of, giving information, etc. So because of, sorry. So narrowing this down, a big platform, or one of the biggest platforms for media right now, is YouTube. And YouTube doesn't really translate or transcribe things that well on its own, even if you're watching an English video and you want English subtitles. YouTube doesn't do a very good job at translating the information that's being presented within a video to something that anybody can understand, even if they have a different language. And this presents a problem because, say you're watching a YouTube video, or you find a YouTube video that you're interested because you want to learn something, and you find out that it's in a language that you don't understand. Well, the video is pretty much useless to you, even if it's about something that you want to learn about, because you're not going to be able to understand the video no matter how hard you focus, no matter how many times you watch it, just because of that barrier that exists between languages that's so difficult to overcome. So the solution that Palash came up with was real-time YouTube translation. And the idea itself can be applied to a lot of different contexts when it comes to translating language, right? So one of the possibilities, or one of the possible outcomes of this, is that you help make education more accessible for people in developing nations by having real-time YouTube translation. Because most videos on YouTube that are educational are free, and the only real barrier that anybody has in terms of this, if they're in another country, is that they can't understand what's going on simply because of the language. So that's like, one possible application for this real-time YouTube translation. And of course, it's also, I guess, like, the applications are much broader. So, anybody with an interest in something, it doesn't necessarily have to be education. Being able to consume the content and information that is available to you on YouTube is a wonderful thing, because you can learn things, you can relax and enjoy something at the same time, and giving people more wider access, or the ability to watch any video regardless of what language they speak, where they're from. That really opens the doors for people across the globe, and it's definitely one of the reasons why this project did so well.
Yeah, just to add to that a bit, this is a problem that I had seen and I had experienced for myself. So one summer I volunteered at a school in India, and they basically didn't have many teachers there, and the quality of teaching there was definitely not what I was used to. And for me, I looked at myself, right? And I think all of us here in this room, at some point, you've learned something. You've learned something from YouTube, you've learned something from Khan Academy. And for them, that's not an option because they didn't understand English to the proficiency that they could go on Khan Academy and understand him talking about calculus, right? And from that's where I got the idea from originally. So I sort of used to keep a notebook with me, and every time I saw something like this, I would just put it down in the notebook. And I understand that's more of like a passive strategy that you do all over your life, but I think more actively you can still look at yourself and try to find these problems, but then you have to do reflection versus what I did was I was actively looking everywhere for problems that I think I could solve, and that's where I actually got the idea from. And I think another important thing that's going on here is, I could have gone for an angle of, I want to do translation to translate like K-pop videos into English or something. I want to do like more of an entertainment angle. And you can definitely do that. But my advice to you for a hackathon project, and in general, I would say like for projects in general, always try to go for the more impactful way of doing things. Instead of going for entertainment industry, I chose to go for education, well, because that's where I found the idea from. But in general, if you were to come up with this idea on its own, I'd say like don't do something. Okay, I don't want to discourage you. If entertainment is what you're passionate about, go for it. But I think it's always better to have ideas that create more difference in people's life. And I think when people hear about it, it affects how they perceive your idea. And I think in general, it's better to hack for good instead of hacking for like, yeah. um, but yeah, that's all I have to add to that. Yeah. And I think that's the end of our slides. But now what I want to do is I want to make it more interactive, and let's talk more in the room about certain ideas that we can come up with right now. All right. So if someone wants to turn on their camera, or if anyone wants to talk, and maybe like pick a broad category, and then I can go through the process of coming up with a new idea with you right now.
Education.
Okay. Education. Okay. So in education, what problems do you know of in education? Like, if you make it a bit more specific.
What is it? If school is really worth it, or field trips. Field trips. Let's do field trips.
Field trips. Okay. What about field trips?
There's not enough of them, and I believe that with field trips, if you host field trips in high school, the students are more eager to learn stuff. Because I know when I went to because when I had a field trip in Corpus Christi, I learned not just like the technical stuff, because it was a tech competition that I had to go on to, but also like how to navigate different areas, and like balance your budget, and all and do all that kind of life stuff. So like having more opportunities for field trips in like high school or colleges.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Now, this is a problem you've had, which is really good. And I think the way you could target this with a text solution would be, let's say you can make like sort of like some sort of like basic web scraper, okay? And you scrape the internet for field trip ideas, or let's say you have them, you find like locations near your school. You give the service a location, and it finds locations near your school which are educationally good for field trips. And based on that location, it can create like a budget. It can calculate the distance from your school to that place. Based on that, it can calculate how much money it would take to organize a field trip like that. And then it can like come up with a proposal for that field trip. Now, how does this solve the problem? I think this solves the problem of making more field trips, because it makes administrators' life a lot easier. And basically, all they have to do is they just have to put their school location in your service, and it will give them proposals for field trips that they could organize. And you could take this even a step further, right? You could be like, oh, this is a bus company that you can hire out. This is this company that you could use for your field trip. And you could find those in the area if you use the Google Maps API, right? And based on that, you can very quickly create like a one-stop shop for school organizers who want to make a field trip, or even students. Students could go on there. They could come up with new field trip ideas, and they could look at one of them, and they could download a proposal, and they could send it to their organizers or teachers to look at. And like you're streamlining the whole process to an extent that's not been done before. And right now, if a school organizer had to organize a school trip, they have to first find an idea, then they have to look for ways to make it viable, then they have to type up a proposal and submit it to like higher ups to approve. But here your app does all of this, which would take like days or weeks for them to do, and it does it like instantly. How do we feel about that? Alan, you there? Okay. But that's sort of how you, something to notice there is, he came up with a problem that I thought was pretty specific. So I was able to go right into it. And I think the most important thing here is when you look at the problem, think of my understanding was, his problem was, okay, we don't have enough field trips, right? And to my understanding, that usually happens because of, budgeting concerns. People don't want to do the work of organizing one, because I understand organizing is really hard. And I think those are the main two reasons why we don't have a lot of field trips. And while we can't do much about the budgeting problem directly, we can indirectly help both of these problems out by making something like the tool that I described right now. Because you could find unconventional field trips with the Google Maps API that that haven't really been explored by other schools, that are not really something that has been done before. And chances are, if they're unconventional and they're close to you, it might actually be cheap enough to fit in your budget. And so in a lot of these situations, you have to break the problem down into, you have to keep asking the question why until you're able to reach a problem where it becomes specific enough that you can solve it. Yeah, I'll do that process again with until we have time, basically. So if anyone else has any broad category, let's do that again. I mean, now's a great time for you to flesh out your hackathon ideas if you have if you don't have something that you're happy with right now.
I'm not participating in the hackathon since I am an organizer, but an idea that, or something that I struggle with personally, is that I have ADD and I cannot for the love of me remember to check my email. So that's why I have like 4,000 emails in my inbox. So maybe people could help me out with that.
Yeah, I think sort of, yeah. So I think the problem here becomes, we can't have her go through all of her emails, right? And I think because that's too distracting, and that's yeah. And basically the way here is to do filtering, right? You filter out the most important emails out of the ones that, all the emails that you get, basically. And Gmail sort of does that already. So, I wouldn't do that as a hackathon project, but I think something you could do is you could improve upon, the Gmail algorithm, or find the most important emails and then filter them out of like the 4,000. And there's probably like 30 emails that are actually important. And you can then look for time sensitivity in those emails. You can go in and be like, oh, this one says you have to accept this offer by April 6th. And then you show her that email right away. And you bother Ellen a lot. And then you show her that email somehow. And yeah, I mean, there's always like ways that you can improve here. But basically, the essence of the idea becomes, some sort of filtering or some sort of like smart compose feature, right? Something I made in a hackathon was it sort of like basically just looks at your emails and it summarizes them. So like there are a lot of long emails which have like, oh, hi there, we're sorry we couldn't offer you admission. Yeah, you're super impressive. But the essence of the email is just that, yeah, we couldn't offer you admission. And I'm sure we've all seen our fair share of those, right? So the idea there was, a lot of professional emails have a lot of fluff built into them. And we can remove this fluff from them and then just show the essence to the users. And I think something like that could also be helpful here. That like you just remove a lot of the emails that are not important, and then you remove all the fluff from the 30 emails, and then you're left with, give or take, like 50 or 60 sentences that you want to read. So that's sort of the key here is, is you just have to think about the problem. You have to look hard at the problem, and you have to think of all the vectors that you could employ to, decrease the problem. And I think another angle to take here is think about what technology can do easily, right? A lot of things, like summarization, there are a lot of APIs for it. Translation, there are a lot of APIs for it. And you want to keep into mind what sort of technologies what sort of technologies you have access to, and that will really help you build out your feature space. And it can also help you in the beginning, like, you shorten down your design space for the idea. So for example, if you don't like, or if you can't use the Google Maps API for your life, then you don't want to do the idea about school administrators and field trips that I was talking about before, because that's the main technology that you'll need to use there. So you can use your team's tech expertise as a filter for which ideas you should make. Something I'll say though is that don't be afraid, and I definitely encourage you to try out something you've never done before, just because I think that's sort of the point of hackathons, is just being more ambitious than you would in a professional setting, and setting goals that you can realistically not achieve, but you'll still end up learning about a new area of technologies that you weren't familiar with. I think you can extend sort of this ideation logic to your personal projects as well. I see like a lot of like people make projects that are super, they're sort of overused. And a good way to like add more flair to your resume and, just make something cooler is to go through this ideation process and learning new technologies, as you implement these cool ideas that you come up with. If anyone else has any broad category that they want to focus on, we can do the ideation process with that again. Otherwise, I'll just keep on, I'll do my own thing if you don't have any ideas right now. You can also put it in the chat if you're not comfortable unmuting and speaking. That's perfectly fine.
I was thinking of for this hackathon, starting with like a basic calculator, but I feel like that idea is super overused.
Yeah, that's actually something I talked about when I was introducing the presentation, and that was like, you can make a basic calculator, but something that becomes a lot more impressive and that's not very much more technically challenging is you can make something like something that tracks your workout and food routine, and it sort of calculates how much food you should be eating per your workout to achieve your goals, basically. So that's basically calorie counting and simple calculations. But when you pitch that idea to someone, it comes off as a lot more interesting than if you were to pitch a calculator to them. And but there's nothing wrong with going for a calculator or going for a simpler idea, because this is a beginner's hackathon. But a lot of times, ideas that seem very hard, ideas that seem very impactful or very big, there, if you break it down, you can always implement a simple version of it with the knowledge you have. And I think it's always good to challenge yourself a bit in hackathons.
I think I just came up with one idea where I would just try to find the impact of certain energies like fossil fuels or renewables or nuclear energy into like actual carbon footprint or some other thing. But I would probably have to use websites and all that stuff to get that information.
Yeah, yeah. So I think there are APIs for that, and I think what you could do is you can like look up easy facts. So you can be like, oh, how much does a pound of no, sorry, how much does a megawatt from coal produce in carbon dioxide? How much does a megawatt produce when you're using nuclear? And then you can sort of ask the user, and you can do those calculations on the app. Um, a way you could make this a lot more interesting. So yeah, this is actually something I tried to do at a point. And a way you can make this a lot more interesting is if you sort of like remarket it. So instead of saying like, oh, you made like 760 tons of carbon dioxide, you can make the impact more clear to the user in a different way. So what I mean by that is you can, what I went with there was, instead of saying tons of carbon dioxide, I made my metric, how many penguins have you affected, or how many polar bears have you affected, or how many tons of ice have you melted in the Arctic Circle? Because now the reason why you want to do that is it's not anything technically harder to do, right? But what it does is, in the mind of the user, it creates sort of this more personal feeling. Tons of carbon dioxide, like who knows what tons of carbon dioxide are. But I know if I killed a penguin with my carbon emissions, that's on me, that's blood on my hands, and that makes it much more likely that I'm going to change my lifestyle or do something about it. So that's sort of how you can innovate on an idea that a lot of people already do, is you can add something that changes how people look at it, basically.
Mhm. So basically, make the result more visible. For
Yeah,
example,
exactly. Make it more humanized, because I think a problem a lot of technical people have is that they'll make a product and they won't consider that the user who's going to use it, they don't know what tons of carbon dioxide mean. They don't know what that means, but they know if they killed a penguin, they know if they melted polar bear habitat, that to someone comes off as a lot more impactful and a lot more personal than if you were to give them a scientific number.
All right, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. But yeah, I want this to be, interactive like this. If you have any ideas that you have already come up with, you can share them with me, and we can talk more about, how you can come up with more features or something like that. So feel free to unmute yourself or just type in the chat if you have anything. All right, Trey. So I'm putting you on the spot here, but I want you to go through the process with me, just so we
Okay.
can drill this. So give me like a broad field, I guess.
All right. Let's say, getting rest, sleeping.
Getting enough sleep.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I think I think that's a good field to target, because I think it's a problem we all have. And, you know, I think that's like I said, emphasized many times before, those are the best problems to work on. And okay, so getting enough sleep. Okay, so let's try to make it more specific than that. Um, let's say getting enough sleep for computer science majors or something like that. Okay. So if we go to getting enough sleep for computer science majors, what I think of is, okay, what are computer science majors doing at night? They might be coding. That's probably pretty reasonable, because I was coding last night till 3 a.m. So I think when you think of that, then you can think of, oh, so what's the most efficient platform to target this for? And I think the most efficient platform is that for software engineers is to look at VS Code, right? I think, or like a text editor, because if I'm coding at 3 a.m., I'm looking at the text editor. And basically, you could make something like a VS Code plugin that you can put in your sleep schedule in, and after, let's say it's like 12, it like shuts your text editor down, and then it reminds you to go to sleep, and you can't code anymore, right? Um, so that's one path of looking at it. I guess another path you can take it is, we could say, oh, getting enough sleep for college students. We could make it a bit more broad. um, the thing is, though, this is the thing I want to discuss. Broad versus specific, right? Some ideas can be very broad. um, I think most people who work in the startup space, and like people who fund startups, they agree that it's best to have a problem that's extremely specific. Like, the more specific you can make it, the better. Until you make it so specific that the only person in the world who's going to use your product is you. I think it's always better to be a bit more specific. The thing is, if I think of, getting enough sleep for computer science students, I can easily come up with, how I would implement this. What's the best, place to put this feature in? But the more general I make it, if I go college students, then I'll have to think of, oh, I'll have to dilute the idea a bit. Then I have to think of, oh, then, oh, for college students to get enough sleep, maybe I'll put like a thing on their phone that tells them to sleep. Maybe, I'll connect to the smart lights and like dim them at night or whatever. And then you get into a space which has probably already been explored. So, I mean, the thing with like them reminding you to sleep, Apple does that, Android does that. Dimming your lights, I'm pretty sure that's the thing that someone's implemented. And basically, the problem is, the more broad you go, chances are it's already been done, or it's not specific enough. So basically, the more specific you can make it. I don't think anyone has a VS Code plugin that tells you to sleep, at least until now. VS Code, for anyone who doesn't know, is a text editor where people write code, and you can make plugins for it. And basically, it's sort of like installing apps on it. So basically, the more specific you make it, the more likely it is that your idea is new, it's creative, and it's something that you can implement easily. And generally, you can make it more specific with stuff that you have experience with. So I'm a computer science student. That's why I can make it, computer science students don't get enough sleep. And I think that's something that really helps you narrow it down. And the more narrowed down your idea is, the more likely that's unique, and the easier you'll be able to come up with features and things that you can do there. And I guess another thing I want to talk about a bit is, I think a lot of people, this is just me rambling now, because yeah, but I think a lot of people in hackathons, they think that, oh, ideas are the most important thing. Okay. And you should never tell your ideas to anyone. I think that's counterproductive, because I think you should be telling your idea to as many people as possible. I think a common perception, after people watch like The Social Network, or people who are competitive in general, a common perception within them is that, oh, I don't want to tell my ideas to anyone because I don't want them to steal my idea. Um, thing is, like, idea theft doesn't happen. Like, it just doesn't happen very much. I tell my ideas to people all the time, but I guarantee you that no one in this room is going to make the ideas that I tell them to make them. And even if they make them, it doesn't matter because they don't have the problem themselves. You know, it's if it your idea and you, it's like a relationship. Yeah, sure, you know, by telling people about your relationship, you are more vulnerable, you're more exposed, but that doesn't mean that, you know, uh, that they're going to be able to steal your idea and do it better than you. That almost never happens. So in general, I think it's a very good idea to share your ideas with others. And a lot of times you'll get great feedback on them, and they might even, you know, telling people, they might help you figure out what the problems with their ideas are. A lot of times people become personally attached to their ideas, and then they can't really, you know, find flaws in them. And I think that's why it's super important to actually tell other people who are not that interested in your idea about your idea and get their unbiased feedback. Because I actually think that really helps, you know, create the best ideas is if they can survive through the crowd of people who doesn't want to use your idea. That's how like you can filter out if your idea is truly good or if it's just something that you think is very good.
I think adding on to what Palash said, like especially I think this applies more to personal projects, but it can also apply to hackathon projects if you know you decide to take it forward in terms of, you know, wanting to release it or something for people to actually use. Um I think it's like really valuable to, you know, do some like market research or like get feedback from people as you're sort of going through the process of getting something out that people can use. So whether that be in the beginning where you're like, okay, I think like this is especially for, you know, when you're trying to solve a problem that you specifically don't have, but you think other people have, getting people's, you know, opinions on the problems on a specific problem, which you know that they have, is really important because, you know, that can dictate what features you might want to put in, how much time you want to put in, whether the idea is worth it at all in terms of implementing. Um, I think that, you know, sharing your idea with other people, like as Palash said, stealing of ideas doesn't happen that much. So use other people to your advantage in terms of getting the best product possible out.
Yeah, and I think low-key the point of that speech was to get someone to speak up in the participants. So if anyone wants to share, you know, a broad field or an idea that they've been working on, I'd love to hear that. But I'm prepared, you know, it's Zoom. I get it, you know, it's like pretty early in the day, so I get it if no one wants to.
Has the idea of racial violence been like discussed? Because there's a lot of there's a lot of attacks against Asian Americans in the news. So do you see if you can flush out an idea with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's actually an amazing starting point, right? Because I think, yeah, I think that's definitely one of the bigger problems that we are facing right now. And okay, I think a good place to start is always to look at current events that are happening. And I think this is a very good example of something that, you know, you should work on. And I think I feel strongly about it. And if you feel strongly about it, you know, you should definitely work on it. That being said, let's flesh this one out, right? I think there are two main, if you break the problem down, to my understanding, you know, there is this barrier that's been created by, you know, some politicians who I shall not name, between Asian Americans and, like, you know, white Americans or, you know, Black Americans. There's this barrier of understanding, you know. I think there are a lot of like misconceptions amongst those communities about Asian Americans. And I think that's making it a bit more specific here, right? Obviously, this is like a multi-dimensional problem, but I'm gonna work on this small specific aspect of it. I'm sure, you know, if you think hard enough, there are so many more angles to this that you can find. Um, Okay, so if we go with the idea that awareness is a part of the problem, then what you could do with awareness is you could sort of make, okay, one of the most simple things that you could do is you could make like a website that clarifies a lot of the racially charged misassumptions that people have about Asian Americans, um, like the wrong claims that have been made. I don't want to repeat those claims, but basically, you could sort of make something that's raising awareness towards it. Now, there are a few ways to do something like this, right? You could make a direct website approach. You could go for, oh, this website or this app tells you more. I think those aren't super effective. The reason why those approaches aren't super effective is because for someone to install your app, they already have to be interested enough in the issue to the point that they're going to go look for an app on that and install it, right? So you want to do something that has the potential to be viral. I think a lot of good a lot of good things that come out of this, I think they're in the format of, you can make it, and you have to make it interactive. I think that's the one of the most important things. I think a way that you could make it interactive is you could ask like a controversial question, right? You can start off with a question like, oh, um, am I someone who has racial misconceptions? That's the quiz question. Or you can make it more controversial if you want to, but you can start off with a question like that, and then you can make sort of like a quiz around it. You can make like an interactive quiz or a game around that, and then you can test whoever your user is. You can test their understanding and see if they have those common biases that you think that people have, right? And you can then point them out to that person, and you can correct them. And the reason why I think this works better than like a brochure style like information website is because it's interactive. I think in general people want to use something that's interactive. The reason why you want to ask a somewhat controversial question is because it helps with virality, right? It helps with, if you think of something, if you look at something controversial, and I think a lot of people who, okay, this is another assumption, right? But I think what I'm assuming here is that a lot of people don't actually think of themselves as someone who's racist or someone who has misconceptions about race, right? So I think by asking a controversial question like that, you evoke a response in them, and you make them ask that question, and they're like, oh, let me try and see if I am actually someone who has misconceptions. Versus if you were to make an information website, the people who are already interested are the only ones who are going to end up going there. You can also extend this idea. I've seen this done in brilliant ways in sort of like video games. People sometimes make like small mini games that handle some of these issues. So I think something that I looked at some point, I don't know if I can find it right now, but basically it was just like a animated video game that was talking about how segregation affects schooling. And basically you were like a character in this game, and you had disadvantages compared to people who were not of your ethnicity and socioeconomic status. And basically in that video game, I was able to experience as the character, the injustices that are happening to some communities here. So I think my advice is go for whichever approach you feel more comfortable with if you're going to target that. And I think that's an amazing space to target right now, because I think that's a solution that people need. But I think yeah. Okay, so with that, I think we are pretty close to our ending time, and yeah, I think okay, so I'm just going to take last comments. Did you think that process was helpful, Alan?
Yes, I really enjoyed this presentation. Thank you so much, Palash, and thank you, Shrey. Thank you, guys. Now I can work on my supposed ideation that I'm definitely going to do.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome.
Make good ideas, make good projects.